Alex, I think, can you give us some history on Le Mans?
Well, a lot of people forget that like racing obviously existed before cars, and when we talk about horsepower, they actually once meant something when they said horsepower, and it was they had to put restrictions. You know, the ACO is over 300 years old. The first restrictions on racing limited the number of horses you could tether to your chariot, and I mean it went from first, you know, can I have 2 wheels and 50 horsepower? You can imagine kind of power they're putting down. And traction was a huge problem. The horses, you know, would I mean, the speed they were approaching, the chariot was basically a kite connected to the last 2 horses in series. And then, of course, it was a huge problem because a lot of competitors would arrive with 4 horses abreast, and like the horse would be like 4 horse, 2 horse, 4 horse configuration. So they could handle, you know, gradients and camber.
Sure.
But if 2 4-horse abreast competitors arrived, you know, into a turn, I mean, braking back then really meant something because, you know, if you lost your braking, you literally lost your horsepower at the same time, literally. And you can imagine when a horse, you know, I mean, unfortunately expired during the race, you can't really pit to, you know, remove it from your power, you know. I mean,
drag it along.
Well, I mean, drag it along. It's, you know, the other horses, you know, they just keep running. Also, they all have to have the horses. They would all have to wear hoods because if any of the horses knew what was happening, they didn't really turn on their rider, who at that point was lucky to be alive. So, you know, anyway, you know, and of course the barriers were just walls of bushes set on fire to keep the horses moving in the right direction. And so
that's where the term trial by fire came
and
from.
that's where, you know, firewall came from. Pitting. When they said pit back then, it actually was an open smoldering pit, you know, where the surviving animals were cooked to feed the fans who, you know, could approach the terrible heat coming off the race course. And so Le Mans moved into the 18th century. I mean, the restrictions which brought, you know, the horsepower coupling units, which basically looked like a 20-foot long chassis made of timber to which the horses were chained, evolved into a 14 or 15 horses in a single line tethered with an overhead kind of metal pipe from which the horses would have to keep running in the same direction because often if they didn't, you know, the whole chassis would come apart. So anyway. And then the anyway, so
fascinating development.
Survival rates among the propulsion systems increased almost 20% by the 19th century, and then we had the internal combustion engine, which, when combined with actual living horses in the same chassis, was extraordinarily dangerous. So,
And what about cameras? Where do cameras come into play?
Cameras, well, I mean, of course, you know, mobile still shot devices attached to each vehicle for broadcast, you know, is a terrible time. We'd be lucky to get a blob in focus. So, and of course, you know, the speed was determined by, you know, weather vanes with, you know, actual physical inertia, you know, spring device. I'm getting into an area that even I don't know much about. Not many witnesses, riders, or team owners survived that period. So.